So welcome everyone to our Connect event today. My name is Cara Stobart. I am the County Officer for the Devon Association of Local Councils, and I'm delighted to see once again so many parish and town councils represented at our event. This time looking to engage on the topic of the recently proposed reforms to our national planning policies. So we're coming together at a really sort of pivotal time, I feel, for local planning. The reforms on the table are some of the most significant changes that we've seen proposed of our planning system in recent years, with potentially far-reaching implications for our communities as well. So these proposals are going to influence how our towns and villages evolve in the future, with balancing development with conservation and how we meet the housing needs of our residents as well. So today's session is quite multifaceted. First and foremost, it's about supporting you, our member councils, helping you to understand the sort of scope and impact of these proposed reforms. We know and appreciate that the planning system is really complex and really difficult to get your head around at the best of times, but it's also a system where local councils do have a voice and can have influence. So we're really coming together today to ensure that we can stay informed and ensure that our voices are heard and being considered in the national debate. So we're going to be starting with a presentation from Andrew Towlerton. He is an independent planning consultant with a wealth of experience in helping councils navigate the planning system. Some of you may have heard of Andrew before. He is the National Planning Advisor for the Society of Local Council Clerks, and he's also one of the guest speakers at a NAC event later this month on neighbourhood planning. So Andrew's here today, and he's going to talk us through the key aspects of the proposed changes, from the reinstatement of mandatory housing targets to the introduction of grey belts and just the general push for more affordable housing. Following Andrew's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session where you can raise any questions that you might have, and it's a chance to sort of clarify any uncertainties. I am going to caveat this by saying Andrew is not a government minister, he's not a civil servant, he doesn't have a crystal ball, so there might be questions that you have that we're not going to be able to answer today, but we will collate those questions and make sure we feed them up to NAC so they're aware of any concerns that you might have. After the Q&A, for those of you that wish to stay with us, we're going to move into sort of an open discussion, which is really to give everyone the opportunity to share their thoughts on reform proposals. The government's consultation on these proposals closes on the 24th of September, and now would like to hear from councils by the 9th of September. So this is really our opportunity to sort of come together, share our thoughts, and try to present a collective view of Devon Council's perspectives, so they are well represented in NAC's response. Before we delve into the intricacies of these planning reforms, can I just remind all participants to treat each other with civility and respect at all times? Please engage, share your views, ask questions, but please respect our speakers when they're talking. If you could keep yourselves on mute, it really helps to reduce background noise and interruptions. If you have questions, could you leave them to the end of the presentation, please, and make use of the raise hand and chat features to ask them, and I'll come to each of you in turn. And hopefully we can get through all the questions in the time available. Anything we can't answer, we'll look to get an answer to you later on. This session is being recorded, and the recording link, along with the presentation slides and links to the consultation documents, will all be circulated after today's event as soon as we practically can. I'll also be, as always, asking you for some feedback after today's session, because it's really important that we hear from you, not only just to measure the effectiveness of this event and improve future ones, but also it will give us a chance to capture any further thoughts you might have on the proposals, so we can collect them and share them with that. But before I end up speaking for far too long, can I just say thank you so much for everyone for being here today. Thank you so much to Andrew for giving up his time to be with us, and I'm looking forward to another informative and collaborative session. So thank you, everyone. So let's get started, and I want to kick off with just a quick poll, if I may, because I really just want to gauge what knowledge we have in the room already. Okay, so the first poll I'm going to be asking you is just asking you what your current understanding of national planning policy is, and if it's you don't know at all, that's absolutely fine. So I just want you to kind of rate from 0 to knowing nothing to 5, actually, you know quite a lot about national planning policy. That's it. I'm not expecting lots of experts in the room. Okay, so I'll just give you a few more seconds. Oh no, everyone's already answered, so I'm going to end the poll there and share the results. So as we can see, we've kind of got the groups mostly in the middle to the lower end, so and not really feeling very confident in understanding national planning policy. So Thank you for doing that. I've got another one I want to ask you now, which is just seeking to understand what engagement you might have done with the consultation documents so far. Have you actually read them? I'm not going to ask you if you understood them. I think that's probably a step too far, but just for your awareness of them at the moment. Okay, thank you, everyone. So again, sharing the results there. It looks like we've got quite a few that have not read it at all. So this is going to be your first opportunity to understand what the reforms are like. We've had some attempts at trying to understand, to read the documents. I can understand why you might want to give up on them after a few pages. They are very technical and heavy documents. So hopefully we're going to be able to make it clear for you today actually what the proposals include, and give us an opportunity to explore what that might mean for our community. So thank you everyone for participating in those. I'm now going to hand straight over to Andrew, who's going to share his presentation with us. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation?
We can.
Thank you. All right. I know if you're hoping coming back with thinking, well, I'm going to make this really easy for you, I'm not. The issue with the consultation, it is a very technical consultation. I'm going to be honest with you. There's 90 odd, there's close to 100 questions. And it's good. You're not the only sort of. I'm really pleased, and I will try and do my best to walk you through it. But obviously, in the time, there is a lot of questions in there, and many of them are very, very technical. Even me as a planner struggle with some of the questions, but I will try and walk you through it to the best of my ability. I might as well do the other bit. There are other things happening which aren't in this, and I will touch on them a little bit as we go along. The National Planning Policy Framework is the key planning document in England. It sets out the government's planning policies, and all local authorities or all planning decision makers have to work in accordance with it. And it deals with strategic and practical issues. Now, prior to the election, the government stated in their manifesto that there would be a blitz on the English planning system, to use their own phrase, including reversing many of the changes introduced by the government in 2023. And they said they'd do that within the month of being elected. And there was some scepticism on that. But to be fair, they have done it. And there does seem to be an impetus that they're going to do some big reforms around the planning agenda. And there's a lot of sort of thinking behind that. But the key ones really around that, and I'm not around the need to build more new homes. And to be honest, whoever was going to be elected was going to go for more. But this government in particular seems to be saying that we're going to build them, and we're going to build them a lot quicker. And also about achieving sustainable growth and the infrastructure. There's a lot of balls in the air there. You're talking about sustainable development, a lot more housing, a lot more infrastructure, and it's a question how these all come together. The deadline is touched on is the 11th, is the 24th of September. And there is quite a lot in there of interest to the sector, mainly on strategic level, less on the practical level, but a lot. What normally happens is once you've set this key planning document called the National Planning Policy Framework in place, a lot of the detail will come later. And so it's really important that we influence this document as a sector, with a caveat, this is a very complex document. But I'll try and walk you through what some of the key themes are emerging from it. But I emphasize they're quite strategic in many cases, but it is a strategic document. Most of it, the first quarter to a third of the questions are really about housing and about building a lot more housing. In particular, they reverse some of the reforms made last year about housing, how local authorities calculate their housing need. There's other ways, but there's a formula for determining how many homes should be built at the local authority level. And what the government are now saying is that target is mandatory, i.e. whatever target's set for the local authority, they have to deliver it. There is some, having said that, there is some exceptional circumstances, but it's clear that what they're talking about are very, very exceptional. And even in exceptional circumstances, they're still going to have to meet their housing requirement. How do they do that? Well, they need to look to what they're saying is if you can't meet your housing target in your area, you should look to the adjoining local authorities and see if they're willing to take the slack. And so they've tightened that quite all around. Now, there is a spreadsheet, and there's a debate about this is helpful or unhelpful, which will tell for every local authority what this will mean for them. Now, most local authorities are looking at an increase. For you, I've had a quick count. Don't ask me the different ones, but generally you are looking for 10, in some areas, bigger increases, 10% increase, some things in terms of your housing need calculations. That spreadsheet's there, and it's down by local authority area. Just to warn you, some of yours are not in the local authority category. There are things called joint councils, and you may find some of yours tucked away in the joint council bits. Also, they've removed the requirement. They've also said that these are the proposals, I stress, that, where local authorities have, oversupplied previously, they will not count towards their target. And there's a real emphasis on affordable housing, in particular social rent. And a lot of the additional housing is caveated on the developers providing a lot of affordable housing as part of that, particularly social rent, which is a bit like old style council housing, not quite, but for the purpose of the training, that's what we're talking about. Not major impact for most of you. Also, they're saying that that there needs to be if local authorities can't meet their housing requirement because they're constrained by the green belt, they need to review the green belt. Only flagging that up because that's likely to be a massive battleground in many areas. And it also introduces the concept of grey belt land in the green belt. Not major impacts for most of you, but just to flag up. And then there's this thing, well, if land comes out the green belt, 50% of it must be affordable. Going back to the housing, I should have had at the time, there is also a proposal for 32 new towns. They do not form part of those housing calculations. They will be additional to those housing calculations. We don't know how the government going to set up a task force to determine where these 32 new towns, or if it is 32, whatever, go. Design, there's lots of tweaks around there, particularly impacting on us. They've removed the reference to beauty and beautiful, but their argument is that's such a subjective term, it doesn't really mean, so let's just have better terms like good design or well designed. They're not saying that means that they're still not looking for more beautiful developments. Design codes, which I'm sure some are familiar with. They're still on the agenda. Real focus on building on brownfield land. It doesn't say a lot about neighbourhood plans. We suspect they're here to stay. And the only slight glimmer of positivity is the fact that one of the reforms, there was a minor reform introduced in 2023, which would have strengthened neighbourhood plans in certain circumstances. The government said that isn't one of the reforms they're minded to reverse. However, the problem with issuing neighbourhood plans is we don't know funding for previous years. So neighbourhood plans seem to be untouched as part of these reforms, but it may be something in your responses you may want to say, neighbourhood planning should be here to stay. A lot about economic growth and green energy. Not only are local authorities now required to find more housing sites, they're going to have to find more sites for employment. And they're struggling to expand or upgrade facilities, infrastructure to support the growth of knowledge and data-driven creative. So there's a lot about high thing, but there's also other bits about infrastructure I'll touch on in a second. A lot about low carbon generation, particularly onshore wind, and we've already seen government move around this and renewable and local about the need to support that, including minor and major. And one of the questions is, how can we support that? There's issues around that, as probably you may have read in the press already, particularly at large scale ones. Having said there's going to be a lot more employment and a lot more housing land, also we're going to see a lot more infrastructure. There's already proposals about making it easy to put big pylons up and various other bits and pieces. What they're saying when planning proposals come forward, which involved upgrading public service infrastructure, hospitals, prisons, schools, the planning authorities should place significant weight on approving those. And there's other things happening behind the scene to make those sort of things fast-tracked. Perhaps slightly disappointing for the sector is there was a proposal that the previous proposal in 2003 would have merged what are called community infrastructure levy funds and Section 106 agreements into a thing called the single infrastructure levy. Why is that potentially significant for us as a sector? Is because if you're in a community infrastructure levy charging area, parish councils receive 15% of the share of that, rising to 25% if they have a neighbour plan. The government's proposals last year was that they would bring, everyone would have to introduce community infrastructure levy, and also that the parish share would remain. What this means in areas which have got some inclusion, you won't receive a share of Section 106 monies. There's a lot of talk about how do we plan cross-border? How do we operate strategically? Particularly, and so there will be, we don't know what a lot of the detail are, but there were new mechanisms of cross-border strategic planning. And what we're talking about there is groupings of areas having bigger role for the mayors or bigger roles for combined authorities, or if you haven't got those sort of mechanisms in place, some form of imposition or some mechanism will put in place to make sure that areas work more closely together. We don't know quite what that looks like, but it's clear where you've got elected in areas which have got metro mayors, they will be given planning powers to coordinate where this new housing is going to be built and where these new towns are going to go. There's other bits and pieces. They're proposing increases in planning fees particularly to pay for more planners. There are local authorities they're talking about again, but this has been mooted on them. But again, I suspect they're serious about this. If local authorities don't produce local plans quick enough, they may face some sanctions. Now, the other one is this has created a lot of uncertainty in the planning sector because the reforms, if they go ahead, are quite significant. And so they're saying, if you've got an existing local plan in place, the likelihood is you're going to have to review it, and you're going to have to review it very, very quickly. There will be some transitional arrangements in place, particularly for local planning authorities who have produced local plans, so are close to approving their local plan. But those protections are mainly for areas which aren't proposed to see a lot of new house building. You've got a local plan which is near to completion and you're in an area which is likely to face significant new house building based on new government's housing targets, they're saying you've really got to revisit your plan. And most areas across the country are looking at potentially big increase in housing targets. From the questions, there's lots of other questions in there they're posing about how can we promote more building on small housing sites? What more can we do to promote small-scale renewable energy? It covers virtually all bits of planning, and this is very much a whistle-down tour around what it means. But we know that there are already, particularly because with my SLC, the Home Builders Federation are backing. There are some people who are very supportive of this plan and want to see the government's proposals implemented quickly. And so it's really important that we as a sector respond to it. And on top of that, obviously we play our part in for what is, I must say, is a very technical consultation. So I do urge you to, please don't feel you need to respond to all 90 odd questions. but do focus on some of the key ones, because downstream it will have implications. Last thing I was saying to come up before questions is it does talk, not about this document, about a greater involvement in communities in the planning system. And it talks about town and parish councils, but it also says that their role is about shaping development, not blocking development. To take any questions about this, really all I want to do is to just have a discussion between yourselves to help you shape your responses, because I do encourage everyone to respond if they wish to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Can I get you to stop sharing your screen for this section? Thank you. So like I said, this is a whistle-stop tour of some of the themes, and Andrew has sort of distilled some of the areas which he thinks that parish and council should be more aware of, and that you might be interested in commenting on. See, if there's topics in here, I do recommend you go read the document to read a little bit more of the detail. But I'm going to open it up to questions at this point to say, was there anything that you've sort of had highlighted to you then that is of particular concern to you, or that you just might want Andrew to explain a little bit more detail about, if he can recall the details at this point, or if the detail's even there. So at this point, please type your questions either into the chat or use the raise hand, and I'll come to them each in turn. So I'm going to start with Liz Bullard. Sorry if I said that wrong, but would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, that's me. Yes, you got it right. Good girl. I got one or two questions actually. Currently, am I right? Affordable housing doesn't count towards the 5-year housing supply, does it? Will it in the future? Another question is, I was at a planning committee meeting yesterday, and one of the proposals was in that planning application that it'd be 50% affordables and 50% would be prime residents, so residents only, because obviously, like in North Devon, there's loads of other places in North Devon, we've got problems with second home ownership taking up houses which locals want to buy. And I was told yesterday, unless you've got a neighbourhood plan, that's not enforceable. And the other thing was, how's the devolution thing in Devon going to affect all this? Because it hasn't actually come into effect yet, has it? That's only three.
All right, perhaps I'll do the first two.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a really good question, to be honest. I'm not really going back, and I think, my understanding is that will be the affordable housing will be included as part of the calculations. But it's a very good point, and I would urge everyone who's responding to put in to make sure that any affordable housing is included in meeting the housing target, because you're right, in certain circumstances it's not included in the current rules.
Thank you.
The second question was about, again, I'm just agreeing with, you're right, there's no reference to second homes in part of this. That was one of the things the previous government said it was going to take action about. And again, it might be something which you might want to flag as part of your response, because the advice you're given is correct, because currently the only mechanism you've got to do that is through a neighbourhood plan.
Thank you.
Now, the third question, I don't know if anyone else is better to talk about devolution, but I know, sorry, I'll let other people, and then I might come in a little bit, because I can tell you what the county associations and various other bodies thinks where this is going. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
On the devolution thing, I think we're definitely still in limbo land here in Devon, because we were part of that first tranche, and now we've got a new government, and we don't know what that's going to pan out like at the moment. But there was obviously provision being built into that about building closer working relationship with Home England. But there's a whole different strand of work now happening with Homes England about trying to escalate housing development, isn't there? So I think we're going to see these operating side by side, I think.
I was going to say, I can't talk about yours, but I think the view is this will be a driver for those who haven't got deals or devolution in place to move pretty quickly. And you may see in areas like yours, and I might be reasonable, that elected mayors will be mooted again.
But there is a housing task force with the principal authorities, so we know conversations are already starting to happen with Homes England, and we'll just have to see how this pans out. But we're at interesting times. Thanks, Liz, for your question. I'm going to go over to Judy next.
Thank you. Yes, those were interesting questions. I was sort of, they were on my mind as well. So I'm glad Liz has brought them up. My query is whether or not there's any mention of monitoring sort of the biodiversity within these targets, you know, if the expansion of the green belt, the likelihood that we would need to be expanding the green belt, you know, public service infrastructure, you mentioned the possibility of more pylons and so on, and I was wondering if there was any, you'd come across any, you know, any way of monitoring it, or if we were just supposed to plough on.
Well, I can answer in a different way, because with my SLCCC hat on, I was invited to a roundtable discussion involving various bodies. Now, what the government are saying as part of the reforms is they require high levels of biodiversity, they require 40% affordable housing, they're going to require everything as normally as part of developers. The developers sat around that table said, we ain't got enough money to pay for that. And if the government is serious about building homes, they're going to have to make some choices around some of those areas. You know, in the green belt, for example, I showed you, they're saying land out of the green belt has to be 50% affordable, has to meet the biodiversity net gain. They have to pay community infrastructure levy on top of that, or Section 106 monies, and they've got to pay for infrastructure. And the developers are saying, where's the profit? So yes, to answer your question, according to the guidance, yes, that will all be monitored and delivered, and there will be no change. I'm just flagging that some developers are questioning their ability to do that, including areas like yours.
Not surprising. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's always going to remain material consideration, and they'll find those loopholes to be able to potentially compromise those sort of biodiversity kind of requirements, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, the guidance says that, you know, the revised guidance still states that you can't ask for things which makes things unviable, and they're probably going to come back and say, this is your shopping list. If you want biodiversity, you're going to have to move on affordable housing, for example.
Okay, thank you. I'm going over to the chat quickly now. Irene's asked a question about would there be any differences in national landscapes? I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
No, I mean, it's very quiet on those. It does. One of the questions, though, I think does ask about should they have additional. I might be wrong, but it's generally quite quiet on those.
So when we say national landscape, is that referring to like national parks?
I think I might be wrong. I think it's what used to be called AON. It's a new name for AONBs.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is mentioned. And again, if you're in an AOB area, particularly because there is a debate about where these homes are going to go, you may want to flag up that the same protections for what used to be AOB still apply.
Thank you. Because we do have a lot of AONBs and sites of scientific interest and similar in Devon, so I know that's going to be an area of concern.
It's like you're a bit like the other areas dealing with. Once you take all of them out of the equation, you ain't got a lot of left land. Yeah.
No, which means we get a lot of concentrated housing developments in a few settlements, and that's a real struggle for some areas. Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to move back to hands in the room. So, Penny, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, yes. Hello. Nice to meet you all today. My question is, most of the local district councils have got their local plans in place. Within those local plans, there are many villages, as Devon's composed of a lot of villages. All these villages mostly have a ring round them, and you're not supposed to build housing outside these rings that surround villages. Is that likely to be expanded? I'm talking Bampton at the moment, where there's been several attempts to put housing on a field that is literally just outside planning ring around Bampton. And there must be rings around all these other smaller councils that are listed inside the local plans. Are they likely to take these away, do you think, Andrew?
All I can say is, obviously, as I said before, if a local authority can't meet their housing requirement of the current proposals, they will be required to review that local plan to make sure they meet that housing requirement.
So they could take it away then.
So yeah, so they're going to have to find. Yeah, so there is, that, for me, that would be on the table. There's a planning officer, particularly settlement boundaries.
That's it, settlement boundaries. Couldn't think of the name. Thank you.
No, for me, they will be. I can't see how you could, in many areas, meet the housing requirements without looking at your settlement boundaries.
Thank you very much. We'll bear that in mind.
But any change like that would still require, I suppose, public consultation.
Oh, yeah. No, the local authority would still have to go through the whole process and work out how they, how they would meet their housing requirement. Yeah.
So I think that's a real takeaway for everyone today, is that if you think that your principal authority is going to have to change its local plan, make sure you're engaging in those consultation opportunities to make sure changes reflect your needs and aspirations in your area. Okay, I'm going to go next to Martin Heath.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unmute. There we go. Right, a couple of one clarification, 106 share, what you said earlier, and a couple of other things. Did you say that the 106 may be taken away? It wasn't quite clear what.
No. What the current and the last proposals in 2023 was proposing to merge Section 106 monies with effectively with. If you're, I'm sorry, I'm explaining very. 2023, the proposal, yes, was to scrap Section 106 monies and replace it with a thing called the single infrastructure levy, which is similar to community infrastructure levy. Under the current proposals, that is not going ahead with. So if you're an area where most of the developer contributions come through Section 106 monies, that will continue under the current proposals.
Right, that's that one. The other thing, have you spotted through all your reading, assuming you've got through it all yet, whether or not when they talk about green homes and low carbon, they're going to make compulsory things such as solar panels on roofs and any of those particular things? Have you spotted any of them?
Well, the question, two things. That is one of the questions in it about, is there much more we can do to promote green energy? I think, I mean, it's your response, but I think as anybody who's doing that should really emphasize that, because I'm going back to the meeting I had with developers. Green energy was another one. They're saying we ain't paying for green energy. What, as while we're at it. So it does talk about it, and I think but it does ask questions, and I think you should be potentially saying that it's really, really important that this isn't sacrificed potentially for new house building.
Right, and finally, have you spotted anything? Well, the big bugbear of most people across the country, we build these big giant housing estates, and yet the local hospitals, let's say Exeter, RD&E as they used to call it, it's got no extra beds, no extra anything. And it's no joined up planning is what I'm going to say, and that is ridiculous. The public don't understand that.
Okay, I'm going to respond to that. As a planning professional, I agree with you. The guidance states that the new proposals talk about that's vitally important and that should be provided. So it's there. The question is, who's going to pay for it?
Sounds wishy-washy to me.
Well, it's in a way, and we've seen a lot in areas, the cart before the horse. You get the housing,
yeah,
you get the infrastructure sometime then. And there is, again, in your consultation, I'd be urging you to say, look, let's make sure the infrastructure's considered at the outset, and particularly who's going to pay for it. It's no good saying, oh, we'll have a new school and then 5 down the years find out there's no money to pay for it.
Yeah, it is shocking. And it's not planning, is it? Full stop.
No.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Martin. Over to Ed next, please.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up the question of neighbourhood plan, because I thought I heard you say that there was a query about their future. What does that mean in relation to parishes like ours, for instance, where after 6 years we now have an approved neighbourhood plan?
Well, to be clear about neighbourhood plans, there was some concern. I will talk about the queries about neighbourhood plans in a second. But the government's from my minuting with them, saying neighbourhood plans are safe. And I was saying there was a minor tweak 2023 to make them strengthen them, and the government haven't said that in the agenda. That isn't one of the things they're planning to reform. That's the good news. The bad news is there's no commitment for funding neighbourhood plans after the end of this financial year.
Right.
Now, if the government doesn't pay for the production of neighbourhood plans, that's probably going to cause issues. It's very difficult. And then the second bit is, you're right. When the government says that local plans need to be reviewed in light of the changes, where does that leave neighbourhood plans?
Yeah.
Are they saying you're reviewing the neighbourhood plans, but you don't have to review you review your local plan, but you don't have to review your neighbourhood plan? Well, somebody mentioned earlier, well, if they start messing about with settlement boundaries, you may be in a position where you go, well, if we don't review our neighbourhood plan, it will be out of date.
Yeah. Absolutely. The question
Yeah.
of settlement boundaries was key in ours. Yes.
Yeah.
Took a long time to agree.
Yes. So that's the
Thank you.
uncertainty, is that our lot neighbourhood plans going to have to be reviewed, and also where's the money going to come from?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
There's always going to be that fundamental conflict. If something changes in the local plan and the two documents are then in conflict, it just doesn't, does it?
No.
And it would probably always go in favour of the local plan, I'm guessing.
Yeah, because that's in conformity to national planning policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to jump over to the chat quickly. Sally has asked how these reforms relate to sort of national parks.
But from my understanding, they don't. National parks remain protected.
Okay, and they'll continue to have the same sort of planning policies related to them as they've.
Yeah, I mean, without destroying, but they're already national park authorities, because what they've actually set is they haven't been immune from the increase in housing targets. So they're saying that the areas around them will need to take their share. But you can imagine what the areas around are already facing a 15% uplift by saying, do you mind taking some of the other ones? But there, yeah, we haven't seen anything about national parks.
Thank you. Next question back in the room for Peter.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We touched on national landscapes, formerly AONBs, earlier. They're an absolute thorn in our side. We've had a neighbourhood plan for 6 years now, and it has. We're running up against objections from the AONB officer, planning officer, and unfortunately, several of these have been to committee, and unfortunately, we have a fairly new borough council, number of new borough councillors on the planning committee, who I believe are not properly trained to actually read the evidence within the application. Because in the application, there are negotiations in order to ameliorate the development on the area. And we had one where they went back twice, and then the AMB officer put in another thing saying object, and the committee took that as read and rejected it. And it was completely out of order that application or that comment was made in that way, without nobody referenced the ameliorating factors, that all the trees they were going to put in, the bushes and all the rest of it. And we thought it was particularly bad form. And it's up to the developer whether they're going to appeal. That's fairly recently. But also settlement boundaries again. What is a settlement boundary? We have a road with 7 houses in it, and somebody wanted to put a house where some former sheds were on the footprint of the sheds, and they were turned down because 2 reasons. There was no pavements. Well, there are very few pavements in our villages. In one village in our parish, there are no pavements, and that's been used in that parish. And the second reason was they used the Braintree, saying it was not developable. You couldn't carry out the development because of the Braintree. And I thought Braintree was to encourage development of outer settlement sort of brownfield sites. Your comments, please.
I can't. Well, there's a number of things. A couple of things. There's nothing to do with that. The consultation. The government are hinting that members of people on planning committees at the district boroughs should have some formal qualification in planning. The question about yours is it's a good. I mean, it's a fair one, because under the previous one there were mooting to allow development, to make development easier in areas of outstanding natural beauty, particularly affordable housing, because it's very difficult to get, as you probably know better than me. I'm sorry I'm using old terminology, but there doesn't seem to be any appetite, as I can see, to make any changes around national parks and AONBs about a relaxation of the planning rules. Now, that where potentially that might come to a head is when we get some big solar panel or wind things coming in. Yeah,
well, that's going to be a completely different question.
yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
It's much an observation, because the number one, and I think it says it in the document that's just come out, there is a presumption that if somebody goes to the expense of putting in an application, it should have a reasonable chance of achieving an approved status. And in our particular area, that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, it's.
On the other hand, we are winning appeals. So
yeah, no, in terms of I can't go A and B, so I can't remember the right phrase. From my reading of the thing, is there's no significant changes proposed.
okay, lovely, thank you.
All right.
Always good to know that those landscapes will be protected, but also just another thing that we can add into our responses, that highlighting the importance of retaining those protections on those areas as well, isn't there? Okay, I've got another question in the chat. It says, does the document say much about self-build land allocation?
It recognises that there hasn't been enough sites come forward, and it does ask about views on how we can make that easier. Now, what I can tell you is, being a former head of planning a long time ago, the issue with small sites and self-build is they probably take as much, in terms of allocations, they probably take as much time to allocate as large sites. And if you've got minimum resources, why would you get in about allocating small sites? But yes, it does ask the question. It says we're not getting enough coming forward, and has anyone got any suggestions on how we can make it easier?
If parish council have suggestions on how they can make it easier.
And also traditionally, yes.
Okay. Question in the room now, Liz.
Hi everybody. Andrew, I just wanted to ask a bit more about developers and viability related to affordables. Given that most of us who've looked at big estates being built have seen the number of affordables that were planned disappear to a much smaller number than was proposed. And given that all the districts in Devon are very much looking for affordables and other forms of social housing because of the housing crisis, is there anything in the NPPF that tackles the likelihood of developers saying these figures, government, districts, everybody, are unachievable, and if not, should there be?
I'll come back to the thing, the roundtable discussion I went to, but yes, it's very strong affordable housing. The government have set itself some ambitious targets about the number of affordable houses which are going to be built across the country. And we all need more affordable housing. And they've also said that the public purse isn't available to build them. So they will have to come through development. So, when you're right, traditionally developers, when we've set them targets, haven't delivered anywhere near the numbers they've said. So I know it's a green belt, not a good analogy, but they're saying if land comes out the green belt, and it's used for development, 50% of those homes must be affordable.
Can I ask a supplementary question?
Well, I was going to say the question. The point is
if
the government don't make the cake to be nicer in terms of developing contributions bigger, and it's all about how you cut the cake, using the developer's analogy, they're saying, well, if you're having 50% affordable, you can have that, but you ain't having biodiversity net gain, and you're not having green technologies, because that would make it unviable.
Right, and that is coming from developers' responses to this at the moment.
Well, I'm just going about the roundtable discussion I was at, which had some
right.
2-3 major house builders and their view, and to be fair to them, I do see their point. Asking for 40-50% affordable housing, asking for biodiversity, asking them to pay for the infrastructure. Is there that much profit in sites? Particularly if the government wants them to build houses quickly.
I think it's just kind of painting a picture of compromises, isn't it? And quite frankly, housing targets not likely being met if you've got to venture into these new spaces, isn't it? That's what it feels like, doesn't it?
Yes.
Although we will wait and see. Did you have another question there, Liz?
No, I'm just over the last 30 years or so, the chat that we get down at our level is that the developer lobby at government level is extremely strong, and we haven't seen any of the major house builders going bust, have we? No. So presumably they have been making profits, and I'm just it seems to me there are a lot of irreconcilables all being pushed together in the approaches that the government is taking. Completely understand the whole affordable thing, the need for social rent and all that stuff. But I'm just wondering how effective this consultation can possibly be when there are such irreconcilable demands in the planning system at the moment. Do you, as a professional, do you see any way in which this consultation can constructively influence the debate, or do you think everybody's barking up the wrong tree and there are no trees anyway?
Well, I can't tell you because I work in the sector, but I think the points you make are really one of the key questions about this consultation. It's great, but can we have all of this? The risk will be that if the government's priority is building new homes, if that's the top priority, building these new homes fast, there are risks with that. Potentially, we've seen. I know you. I'm just taking your words and other people. We've seen numerous saying, "Oh, don't worry, the infrastructure will follow," and it doesn't. And I think you're right. I think it's very valid points you're raising, and there's a lot of concerns in the sector about the delivery of some aspects of this. And if it was a 10-year plan, it would probably make. But this is, they're saying this is going to happen in the next 2-3 years. Other bits, the construction industry is not geared up to build the number of homes. We don't have the brickies or whatever we used to have in the past.
No, that's right. So one more thing then, how much is the cost of land a factor in all this?
Well, a lot of it is about viability, isn't it? I'm based in Yorkshire, parts of Yorkshire. I really struggle how this is going to work. But paying for all this infrastructure, potentially in areas like yours, there might be the profitability, but is there that much profitability in the house building to pay for all this?
Right. Thank you.
Definitely thought-provoking subjects indeed. I'm going to now go to Martin. You have another question?
Yeah, just got an additional one as the conversation goes on. Just picking up, I'm just going to say the same thing about this phrase fast building. As I used to be a buildings improvement consultant, that scares me to death, because that normally means shoddy building, bad building. The builders will be going back time and time again. They already do, but it'd be even worse. So I'm wondering, I hear on the news very recently that the government are looking at whether they should stop private building control companies and bring it all in-house back to councils. And if they do, I don't know if you've heard any more about that, and if they do, will councils get back to pre-COVID inspections? Because so much is done online, a photograph, and they don't ever go back and see that it's actually been built to what they asked. And quite frankly, unless that is restored, so many of these fast builds are going to be an absolute plague on us all in the future. So have you got any ideas or any thoughts on that, and whether we should all be feeding that back as well?
Well, coming in, Martin, I think I never made the link, but you're spot on what you're saying. I mean, we're getting into a technical area here, but I was head of planning when the government said that builders can appoint their own building surveyors, and it didn't surprise me some of the things are. No, I think you're right. A lot of this is about joined up thinking, isn't it? You're right. It's not only about planning; it's about much more in terms of joined thing. So no, I never thought about it, but I think you're spot on what you're saying.
Right, right.
Now, who's checking that these houses were built up to the standards we think they're going to be?
Well, I'll tell you something.
Reliably.
I've been back and looked at some of them myself because they've been near me, and I thought I'd do the basic thing, which really is basic. Where's the damp-proof course? I found it was buried under a path and stones. I mean, number one, any builder or surveyor or architect knows you've got to have at least 6-inch gap between the ground and the damp-proof course. And they said, oh, they would just chuck the stones over it. I said, but I can't believe this. And I said, has anyone been back to look at it? Oh, no one's been back here. And all these things are building up for the future. We go on about damp houses and the rest, but anybody knows if they live in England, what's the big enemy to homes? Water.
Yeah. Okay. So I've just seen somebody raise a question about enforcement. Again, it's very quiet on enforcement, and I think that's something else you may want to mention in your responses. about
Yeah.
what's the point of doing all this if it ain't going to be, you know, in some areas it's not enforced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just as a clarity then, that standards, building standards has not been included in this consultation, nor has enforcement. Just making notes as I go along. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, shocking.
Okay, and Robert's made a comment in the chat as well. It's not a question, but it's just highlighting the risk of all the retrofitting that will likely have to come in future if this fast building, if we don't have these, you know, like solar panels and all this kind of stuff being sort of built in as we would hope. So does anybody have any more questions? Actually, I've got one quick question. You referenced grey belt earlier. Obviously, this is a new thing and it's going to be something that forms part of the green belt. Can you just confirm what actually do they mean by grey belt?
Well, I can help, but nobody really understands. It's land in the green belt, which is been previously developed. I'll come to another point. But it's not clear. It's not clear, and I already know that we've seen developers, Clarks for parish council in my own parish. We've got developers saying we've got a former colliery site which closed 40 years ago, has been grassed over, and they've already mooted that they want to build 400 homes on it because they're saying it's grey. There is a lot of, you know, some of the issues around this consultation is there are some loose terms. Grey belt. It does also ask, by the way, about previously developed land, and should the government expand its definition of previously developed land?
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that quick clarification. Is there any more questions in the room at all? If not, I will just sort of open it up, I suppose, with just more general reflection and comment about how we're feeling about some of these proposals. I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, Ray, would you like to start us off? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, my greatest concern is the concern of most people, I guess, is the infrastructure. We are likely to be absolutely swamped with traffic, with totally insufficient schemes to bypass or to ease traffic problems. And also water authorities and sewage is a major problem in many communities. We get overloaded systems spilling out into the street, Southwest Water doing nothing about it, and additional construction, additional housing is going to put such a burden on these infrastructure. And I just cannot foresee how we could possibly go ahead unless major intervention and expenses put into rectifying these infrastructure problems.
All I can do is echo, yes, I think that's a valid point to make in your response, and many of the responses about it's nice saying that we need the infrastructure, but we need some real tangible, you know, really clear on how that's going to happen. The risk is we'll get the housing, but not the infrastructure.
So can we assume that issues like, I know you've mentioned some infrastructure, things like hospitals and prisons and all this kind of stuff, but can we assume that sewerage and all that kind of stuff is also silent in this document?
Well, no, it's not silent. What it's saying is that will be effectively saying that that has been considered and will be provided. Now, one of the ways they're talking about providing that is by fast tracking the planning system. So proposals for a new hospital, the planning application will do it with a lot quickly, and in many cases the government will deal with it. So it is covered in that way, where it's a less, well, more quiet as well. And people refer to affordable housing. We've been here before. We've been promised a lot as communities, and some often it doesn't come. And it's that is the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the how and the who and all that kind of stuff of doing it still, isn't it? Okay, over to Mike.
Yeah, I'm presuming moving into the general discussion rather than the questions now. Good. Before I jump in, I mean, just something I put there in the comments. Actually, probably most everything I'm saying is about affordable housing. Is the question of the current methodology of allocation of affordable housing means that local people get any sort of priority, and there is strong support for affordable housing if it's made available to local people. If it isn't, that support drops off in our community, and I'm sure in other areas as well. And I think the other one is, I mean, hearing that basically, let's say, the government's basically saying there's going to be no further support for affordable housing from the public purse has to be cow cuckoo land. I mean, we're not delivering any sort of social housing at the level that's needed. Affordable housing is, everyone says it's not affordable. You know, there's a development across a local village where with a CLT and shared ownership, and nobody locally could afford that, despite it being so-called affordable. So we need a proper definition of affordable that really is affordable to local people, and that has to be, to my mind, an absolutely strong message from us in this one. Locality, also localism, if you like, which perhaps actually, so I'm thinking aloud here, I did think this one earlier, we're talking about the self-build and small scale developments and the capacity to approve those. Perhaps potentially the answer to that is to actually delegate that decision making down to a more local level. We don't centralise as much, we delegate it down more, which I'm sure we'd all support that one anyway, in terms of recognising that local decisions should be made as close to the ground as possible. So I think that's all my observations before I rant on.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm sure your views on affordable housing and how they're allocated will definitely be sentiments felt by others as well. Sure. Anything you want to add to that, Andrew?
No, just I think all the points are very good, and I would urge people to think about incorporating in their response. Yeah, I never thought about the allocation of affordable housing, but you're right, spot on. Yeah.
A quick question has just arisen in the chat, but it says community sort of housing trusts, and I'm guessing this means like land trusts and stuff like that. Are they all going to still have the same powers as before? Is there anything in there about changing that?
It's very positive about the role of communities, including town and parish councils, and about their role in delivering affordable housing.
Good to know. Judy, would you like to make your comment?
Just an additional observation, really, after I think it was Ray's points about infrastructure. I'm just thinking how, with the transport, the need for transport infrastructure as well. Ray mentioned the additional traffic or the housing, extra housings will build up, and I'm just thinking about how the Tavistock to Plymouth railway line and the eventual link back up to Oakhampton is very likely, well, we hope not, but is very likely to be pulled by the government. And that's exactly one of the sorts of things we would need with all the additional housing. It is that kind of transport infrastructure that is also going to be required. It's just the beginning of a rant that I shan't go on about. But I think really it's just another example of the lack of joined up thinking in all of these proposals.
Yeah, I think all infrastructure kind of things, isn't it? It's just, I think we're all just screaming out, it needs government funding in order to achieve this, and we need to definitely make commitments. Okay. Ed, would you like to make your comment?
Yes, please. I'd just like to pick up on the question of timescales, because all I've heard so far is that everything's rush, rush, rush and must be done. Given that we're at the bottom of the chain in terms of a neighbourhood plan, and that JLPs might well need to be revised, I mean, what sort of timescales are we seriously looking at in terms of making any real progress at the bottom of the chain?
I think that's probably better judge for the asking me. I think it's, again, I'm just agreeing with you. It's you know, if we're saying that local plans have to produce, reviewed very, very quickly, and there's sanctions if they don't, and this comes back to really about, well, where do neighbourhood plans fit in there? If neighbourhood plans are supposed to influence what housing is going to look like, but the housing is going to be built very quickly, that's a good question.
Andrew, do you have any feel for how quickly local plans are going to need to be updated? Has there been any clues?
No, I mean, this is a really difficult one for me, because I was previously a local authority head of them, and we were one of the ones who were lagging. And this is not the first time the government have said we're going to impose sanctions on. They've had this for ages, but they've been reluctant to do it. And I mean, and I work in a sector which is not renowned for moving quickly. Planners aren't renowned for fast moving. And so the government is saying, well, you've got to do it in a month, or, you know, in months, in an industry, in a sector which normally works years. So yeah, I'm not really answering that too directly, but I do fear that we'll probably end up with a house. A lot of these houses, you know, and the risk is there's a thing called presumption sustainable development, which is in the consultation. And what that means often is if you don't allocate the houses, we'll let the developers do it for you. And the risk is people don't produce local plans quick enough, or perceive not to produce them quick enough, and then developers just start putting speculative planning applications left, right, and centre.
Based on your sort of previous experience as a planner, on when local plans have had to be revised in the past, could you please kind of like indicative timeframes? Do they kind of is there a precedent, I suppose, for what government might be considering?
There's not, to my knowledge, in terms of if I was going back to being a head of planning, but it's a few years ago, and you're better off asking your district. I mean, it's so far it's had not the effect, because most local plan authorities are saying we're halting. Sheffield, where I work, have said they're halting production of their local plan till they get a better understanding about these, because these housing targets are only proposals at the moment. They could change, and so that's created uncertainty. Now, the other bit is the government are saying we're committed to a lot of consultation. I'm sure they are, but they're saying we're going to do this quickly. Well, how does that marry together? You know, I think it just impose this on us. And yeah, and local plans take generally 5-6 years to produce. And we're talking about house building, and a lot of these houses have been built in the next year or two.
It does seem to become realistic, doesn't it?
New towns who have been there before, never, faced massive opposition again, but these new towns will start being developed in year 2 or 3.
Interesting times.
And if I'm jumping around a little bit, and if the risk is we as a sector, if they don't carry people like us, we've seen the examples of fracking and things, we'll react maybe not in a positive way. We will be the blockers in some cases.
Thanks, Andrew. David, we're next, but we haven't heard from you yet, David. So let's go over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to mention about exception sites, really, and it sounds as if local plans aren't completed in time, a lot of developers will just come in and claim that they can build anywhere with the right that when we had with the lack of a 5-year building target, the exception sites just became a regular sort of scene on the planning issues, and I think that's maybe what will happen. We'll get a lot more just ad hoc building being produced and coming out on areas which are totally unsuitable.
I can do is agree with that. Is a serious risk.
And I think there's something I'm just kind of thinking of, is just a takeaway, is that if any of you are in areas where you think you might be a target for developers looking for these opportunities, is maybe thinking now about how you can structure yourselves to be able to engage in those planning applications. Maybe some thought about, do we need to set up a planning committee, or think about the frequency of our meetings to be able to respond when this happens, if you feel that you might be in an area that might be vulnerable to that kind of approach. Back over to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you again. Just so you also know, because it helps everyone, I am actually chair of planning in Dawlish Town Council, and I've also got an environmentalist hat on as a science person. So just so you know that one, I want to pick up on something that Andrew says way back as a comment, and what seriously worries me, whether it needs to be resaid or whether it really is as stated in the policy, that if we won't do affordables to a certain number, and I believe it was another issue as well, then something has to go. And one of them, I believe, was biodiversity. Now, there's somebody who understands and writes about this in the newspapers, that we've got the lowest biodiversity in the whole of Europe. And we've probably got the lowest biodiversity in the whole of the world of all the main countries. I'm not talking about some desert island, but all the main normal countries. We have a shocking record, mainly because we're an overcrowded small island with hundreds of population increases. I don't know, I mean, I'm not doing a Chris Packham on you, but I'll tell you something, we have a biodiversity crisis, and humans do need to be less human eccentric, because we don't live because we look at a screen like this. Fantastic technology. And we can so easily forget that we live by the biosphere. Without the air being correct, without the animals being correct, without the fungus being correct, we will not survive. And I see everything being planned in here. And listening to the nuance of all this, I don't think the environment side of it is understood. I looked at Steve Reed's specifications at university, our new environment secretary, and just like a chain of every other government, they have no science degrees whatsoever. They don't understand science, and they come into these jobs and flatten everything like a pancake. I know it sounds as if I'm sounding off, but this is desperate. And so I think we should all say in our reviews that biodiversity can't be an and or, it's got to be in there one, and you have to amend something else, because our survival basically depends on a clean, lovely planet, and that's part of the mix.
I would just clarify what I meant by that was because the proposals are that biodiversity, net gain, affordable, are all provided at them. What I was really referring to was a round table I was at, discussion, a regional roundtable discussion for the Royal Town Planning Institute, and where developers were saying, no, we don't think we can deliver all these things. And at some stage, you know, and the guidance is also saying that you can't make schemes unviable. What we're saying is that what the developers are saying, if you're asking for 4% affordable housing, biodiversity net gain, infrastructure, you will make it unviable. And then at that stage, you've got a choice to make.
I'll get that, and I'll just
and Martin, I mean, I'm talking personally.
Yeah.
I think after, you know, as much as affordable housing sometimes gets neglected in these negotiations, often the environment and biodiversity is particularly, you know, overlooked when we get in about what we spend, you know, what developer contributions is spent on.
I think all I would say was, if I'd have been there at that meeting, your development might be unviable, but if you do what you're going to do, the planet's unviable. We've got to understand that only about 2% of the population, and it applies to planners, I know that myself, government ministers have very much clue when it comes to science. It is a forgotten thing. They say, oh, science is so important at schools. Well, it's pity that most of our secretaries of state don't have science, because then it wouldn't be like this.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with the sentiments that you're expressing, Martin. I think it is a real challenge, and it's a very political decision, isn't it? When it comes to decision making, do you go for people being homeless or saving the planet? And it's I don't envy those being those who have to make those kind of challenging decisions and potentially make compromises and stuff like that. But hopefully, what we would like is government putting in policy in place that actually enable all of this to happen and to resource it appropriately, isn't it? But we haven't seen the evidence of that as yet, that they're making those commitments.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, Susan.
Hi there. One of the things that we've all talked about is infrastructure. What nobody has talked about as yet is infrastructure in terms of sewage, because a lot of the small villages are already at capacity. Southwest Water, for example, their latest plan takes them up to 2035. So they have put the capacity based on what they believe is going to happen by 2035. And with these increases in housing and in small areas, that is going to take them over their capacity. If you take Spratford Stream, the Colne, and into the Exe, it is the most polluted water in the country. And the government, you know, isn't mentioning that at all. I would also say, on the basis of settlement boundaries, from experience, having had a planning application go to appeal, be refused, and then under judicial review come back again with the change in the government policy, it's highly likely that that development will now go through, because the local authority cannot meet the new demands, which is a 57% increase in housing through their existing land supply.
I agree with, you know, the first point. It's all about coordinating the plan. Then let's be clear, the proposal says that's all going to be sorted.
It is not going to be sorted. You know, it cannot be sorted in the time scale that they wish to build these houses. And, you know, you can look at any development where they've said they're going to have affordable housing, and it may have started at 35% and it's now down to 5% because of costs and increased costs. The developers cannot afford to develop. And the current, everything that is in this national plan puts it beyond their capability. So your affordable housing will go. And what is affordable housing? Because if affordable housing is building housing estates where there is no bus service and people have to have 2 cars, or children have to walk along roads that are 40 miles an hour because the government guidelines is that you can walk to school if it's 2 miles, doesn't matter what that road is like. You know, it can have no lighting, no pavements, be 40 or 50 miles an hour, and your child is expected to walk along that road.
From my perspective, they're all valid points, and I would urge you to encourage you. However you feel in terms of the consultation, that they're all good for. And the issue about, I know the government has said that the sanctions if you don't produce local plans quick enough is that they'll sanction the local authority. I think the bigger risk is the point you're making is that you'll get speculative development which isn't in accordance with the plan, and that's how they'll punish.
It's happening already,
and it's unfair on the communities who get penalised for that because it's not their fault.
No, and of course, you've got no enforcement, and enforcement is not a statutory requirement of a district council, so they don't have to have an enforcement officer. So people can do what they want to do without being, punished for it, if you like. We've got a situation where farmers can develop barns to produce 7 or 8 homes in what's considered an unsustainable village, but somebody who's got a larger piece of land cannot sell part of that land to produce another home within the settlement. So, the system is blown. I'm sorry. I have no faith in it at all.
Thank you for your comments, Susan. And I think the takeaway we're definitely getting today is there is huge concerns around speculative development and stuff where local plans aren't updated quickly enough. And there's definitely huge concerns about resourcing and infrastructure projects, both small and large. I think that there's really coming through loud and clear from what I'm hearing today. We are at 3:15, so we've overrun slightly. As I haven't got a queue of people waiting to jump in, what I'd like to do is just start to draw this to a close. So it's last opportunity for anything that anyone's got any burning comments they would like to highlight to us. I'm not seeing anyone coming forward. So what I would like to just quickly do to draw this to a close is just do another quick poll, if I may. So again, it's this question is just asking you about how you feel now, I suppose, having heard the presentation, had a chance to chat. How confident do you feel you understand the proposals that are kind of been presented? It's okay if you still feel very unsure, that's absolutely fine. Just kind of getting a feel if it's improved at all for you. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll there. Oh, actually, no, a couple more coming in. Now I'm going to end. Okay. So sharing the results now. So there's still a lot of uncertainty that I'm feeling, but people are feeling a little bit clearer that they understand the proposals that are coming our way. And I say they are just proposals at this stage. Nothing has been agreed. Things can change. And we'll, of course, keep you updated if things do change. And then one final question, one final poll, again, if I may, is just to kind of get a feel of how many councils might be looking to respond to the consultation, and has today helped you in thinking about how you might respond? 10 more seconds and then I'll close. Ending the poll there and sharing the results. So this is really encouraging. Today has been helpful to some degree. Some of it's really helped, but for the majority, it's been somewhat helpful. But hopefully you are feeling a little bit clearer and have a bit more of a feel of what the impact these proposals could have on the community, and might be giving you some ideas on what to put in your response. So thank you so much for participating in that. It shows our event is having a positive impact. That's great. Liz, you've just popped your hand up. Is there something else you wanted to add?
No, just a quick question, Cara. Has a link to this consultation been sent out to all parish councils? Because I haven't seen it mentioned. I'm a district councillor, and it hasn't been mentioned in any of the parish councils I've attended. I just wondered whether they wanted to reply.
Yeah, it absolutely has been shared. But what I'll do after this session is I'll send a link to this recording, this session. I'll send Andrew's slides, and I'll send the link to the documents, the consultation documents again. So and I'll try and do that as soon as possible after this session is finished.
Yeah, that's great. Then I can forward it again and nudge them then. Okay, thanks.
Like I say, we'll remind you that the government's consultation does close on the 24th of September.
24th, yeah, it's not very long, is it? Yeah.
Not very long, so we'll need to get onto your September meetings.
Okay. All right, cheers then, thanks.
Thanks. I'm just going to pop into the chat now, just a feedback form. As always, we really love to hear what you think about these events, but also this is a chance to, if you have any other thoughts that you might be thinking around the proposals, please do log it in this form, because we're going to collate all of your thoughts together and pass them on to NOUT so it can help inform their response on behalf of the sector. But before I let you go, can we just please show our appreciation to Andrew, either through clapping on using the feature on here or just for clapping in your hands. But thank you so much, Andrew, for giving up your time. Really appreciate it. And I suspect you'll be likely forming a response on behalf of society anyway, aren't you? So hopefully the comments you've heard today is all helping.
It hasn't been some comments. No, it has been really helpful for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. So thank you to Andrew. Thanks to everyone. And please, can you complete the feedback form before you leave? The link is in the chat. But other than that, thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.